notice on this analysis, there is something that's really bent in the way we think things should be, have shape properties. The temporal part of me that's bent is just this slice of me, and it's got the shape of being bent, or sitting. And the temporal part of me that's standing, when I say PB is straight at T prime, that just means there is a temporal part of me which exists at T and which is straight. And now I don't say straight at T, right, because it's absolutely straight. It's not straight in some relative sense, which I don't even understand, but some people claim to do. It's just straight. So, there I am, standing at T prime. This is my temporal part at T prime, and it's straight. It's like I lost my arms here. Not more like that. Okay, so we've now shown that four-dimensionalism can give a straightforward analysis of what these so-called relational properties are, these properties that are relative to time, and analyze them in a way that the things that we take to be intrinsic properties are indeed intrinsic, but they're not intrinsic to me as a continuing person, a persisting thing that exists over many years. They're intrinsic to the parts of me. And it's not surprising, that we would talk this way, because when I look at you, right, what am I really seeing? In some indirect way, I'm seeing you. Because if I see the part of something, I'm seeing that thing. When I see the surface of an apple, I'm seeing the apple too, right? But when I look at you, I'm seeing your, literally, directly, just your current part, the part that exists now, the temporal part of the state. But I can also say I'm seeing you as a continuing object, because that is the continuing object that contains the thing I'm directly seeing as a part. So it's not surprising that we go back and forth and easily can mix talk of properties belonging to the parts of things and properties belonging to the whole thing. We do it with spatial parts as well, without really sort of stopping to think about the fact that in doing so, we're naturally understood as referring to temporal parts. Because on this analysis, that is what you're doing. When I say things like, this is green, I'm actually referring to a temporal part directly and saying it has the color green. I'm not saying anything about what color the object, this plant, will have at other times. So the way to understand that is this plant is green would be something like this plant is something which exists over time, has a temporal part at the present time, and that temporal part is green. And that's the correct understanding. So now, the answer to how is change possible is, well, a persisting object that exists over time should be thought of as the sum or aggregate of many stages or parts. And change is just when some of its parts have different properties than other of its temporal properties. That's change. So we have an analysis of change, and there's nothing really mysterious. But this is a radical rethinking of how we should think about ourselves in a lot of ways. We don't think of ourselves as somehow an aggregate of different temporal parts over time. One way to think about that is, well, think about the concern you have for your own future. So you're thinking now about whether you should sacrifice, put money away in the bank or something so that when you're retired or whatever, you'll have money to live on. Now, on this picture, what's going on? Here you are now. What's actually doing the thinking? Not the whole continuum, right? It's the temporal part now that's doing the thinking. So you have a temporal part now that's wondering whether they should do something to benefit what? Not you, literally, not the same temporal part anyway, but some other temporal part that exists at some way future time, 40, 50 years from now. And so in some sense, it looks like decisions that we make about our own future are kind of really more like what we might have thought, more like making decisions about other people, because we're making decisions for future selves of ourselves, but these selves are really, they're not literally identical to the thing that's thinking about it. So it starts to question whether there's the difference between self-interest when we decide to do something for our future self, and decisions we make based on morality when we decide to do something, say, sacrifice for some other person. Because now it looks like there's a real kind of similarity. In both cases, really, we're sacrificing for something that's not the same as us. So it might, usually there's this huge conflict in people's minds between doing something for your own self-interest, doing it for morality for somebody else. But really, this kind of undercuts that distinction. Now, if you had an extreme view, then you might say it totally undercuts it, and you really should just think of your future self as just like another person. And there's no reason to think that because it's your future self, that it should have any special status in your mind as to what you should or should not do now. You're certainly not forced to that conclusion, though, because your future self is related to you. It's not literally you, but it's related to you in very special ways. And most of us think that even for morality, the relation that people have to you matters. It's okay to care more about and do more for your children than for some arbitrary stranger somewhere else. So what's the relation? Well, it's a pretty special relation. Normally, your future self has memories connected to you by memories and so on. They have somewhat similar personality traits, beliefs, values, and so on. So these connections between your future temporal parts and your current temporal part might be enough to say that's why I care more about my future temporal part than somebody else's temporal part. Because they don't have that special relation. So certainly I think, well, this is how I would think of it, it's perfectly justifiable then to have, to care more about your own future self than others in this way. But nonetheless, as soon as we start thinking in terms of these relations, it does still have a radical effect on some of the decisions we make. Because clearly the kind of relations that matter here, remember, it's not literally identity, so these things can be a matter of degree. The kind of relations that matter, like how close the connections of memory are between the two, how similar the values are of the later person and the other, those are a matter of degree and change over time. And the further you go, that old codger out there might not really be all that much like you. Maybe you won't even remember much of what you're doing now. Might have changed their values, and he's going to vote Republican, whatever. Who knows? So once you realize that the further you go into the future, the weaker and weaker the relations that connect you to your future selves, the ones that matter, will be, it seems to justify, at any rate, having a kind of discount rate for how much you should care about, and therefore how much you should sacrifice for your future selves. Near future selves, it seems, okay, they're essentially really connected to you. You should treat them, with utmost respect and do whatever you can. If tomorrow, if you did something stupid today, you really suffer for it tomorrow. Well, that's more or less you, right? I mean, it's not literally you, but it's got the same values, the same beliefs, and remembers everything you did today. That future self will be really pissed at you for not having thought about it. But when you're talking about the person who's 80 years old in the retirement home with Alzheimer's, it's not so clear how much you're connected to that person anymore. And maybe it's not so obvious that you have the same obligation, which you think you do, to do things now, sacrifice now for that person. So it sees that this might change the way, you would think about what is rational to do in preparing for your future, at least for this thing. And it would certainly have a radical consequence if you somehow knew that you were about to undergo some procedure that would turn you into, say, a vegetable who would still be conscious and still be alive, but no longer have any memories of your past and no longer have the values and so on of your past. Then I think on this view, there'd be no reason at all to have any special care for that person, once all the relations have been broken. But on the view that it's, in some sense, that I don't even understand, you're genuinely identical to that future person, then I guess it wouldn't matter if that person is still a vegetable, because you say, but it's me, so I have to care about it. It's still me. But of course, that doesn't mean anything in this new context. In this new context, all you can say is, that's just some future temporal part that's maybe not really very related in an interesting way to my current temporal part. And so maybe I shouldn't care about it. All right, so once you accept four-dimensionalism and think of yourself as just the sum of temporal parts, then it is going to have effects. How radical is up to debate, but will have effects on how then you think about your own future. And, I tend to think that the effects are not going to be that radical overall, at least from my own way of thinking of these things, but nonetheless they're still significant. Okay, so that's pretty much all I have to say. We could go right into discussion, or does that make sense? All right.
Given the new context of four-dimensionalism here, if you accept this premise that our future selves are not that related to us, does it push ourselves to believe more in the terms of realism?
It can. So here's the thing. I mean, it can push you in either of two directions. If your future selves are not especially related to you, then you might say that means my future selves are kind of like other people. But I'm already a very, moral person. I care about other people. I want to do things for other people. So it doesn't mean you should only care about yourself now. It means you should care about your future in much the same way you should care about other people. However, it could push you in the direction you said. If you weren't already inclined to be, moral in the sense of wanting to sacrifice for other people, then when you find out there's nothing special about your future self, that could lead you directly to hedonism. So what it does is it kind of squeezes out, this is an argument that was given by the philosopher Derek Hawkins, so I would recommend his work if you're interested in a book called Reason for the Person. It kind of squeezes out the theory that some people thought was sort of the supremely rational view, which was the self-interest theory, which is what really matters is you and your future selves. That's the view that kind of gets lost. But either the position on either side of it can take over. Yeah.
Then if we were to follow that, then for self-interest, then would that be altruistic? If we're related to all these people that are not indeed us, if we are to satisfy ourselves, is that altruistic in this view?
Yeah. So it's altruistic, but not necessarily in the sense that says any person anywhere deserves the same, moral weight in my view, because it would be perhaps still allowing that your future selves have these special relations to you, and that makes them moral adults. That could be a moral difference. It means that you really ought to care more about those persons. So, like, if you think it's okay to care more about your parents than about some random person in Argentina, then for the same reason you might think it's perfectly legitimate morally to care more about your future self.
So I'm just wondering how this relates to the ethical question of respecting other people's preferences. Because one example or set of examples that really comes to mind is in